In this video, we're going to take an in-depth look at the parallelogram. Recall from middle school that a parallelogram is a quadrilateral who has two pairs of parallel sides. So in this picture here, or in this parallelogram here, the top side parallel to the bottom side, left side parallel to the right side. And since I want to talk about this in more specific terms than just top, bottom, left, right, I'm going to take a minute to label the vertices of this parallelogram. Remember that anytime you label a polygon, you either need to label going in a clockwise fashion or a counterclockwise fashion. So I'm going to label this one M-A-T-H, but notice that I proceed around the parallelogram. I don't skip vertices, or I don't jump from corner to corner. If I had wanted to, I could have proceeded in a counterclockwise direction. In either case would have resulted in vertices M and T being diagonal from one another, as well as H and A being diagonal. The symbol that I'm going to use to represent the word parallelogram is this little parallelogram symbol. So this is parallelogram math. All right, some properties that you need to be aware of regarding the parallelogram. Because all parallelograms have four sides and are therefore quadrilaterals, they possess all the properties of quadrilaterals, including that it has four sides and four angles, an interior angle sum of 360 degrees, and an exterior angle sum of 360 degrees. Due to the fact that this is a special quadrilateral, it also has some additional properties. So remember that, first of all, by definition, a parallelogram is a quadrilateral where both pairs of opposite sides are parallel. I'm going to call or name this parallelogram ABCD. So in this picture, I know that the top side, AB, is going to be parallel to the bottom side, CD. And likewise, I also know that the left side, AD, must be parallel to the right side, which is side BC. So that's the first property. Both pairs of opposite sides are parallel. You may recall from middle school that in addition to both pairs of opposite sides being parallel, both pairs of opposite sides are also congruent. So in other words, my top side, AB, is congruent to my bottom side, side CD, and my left side, side AD, is congruent to the right side, which is side BC. So both pairs of opposite sides are both parallel and congruent. So those are your properties that deal with the sides. We also have some properties that pertain to the angles, and that's what we're going to look at and discuss next. Parallelogram has both pairs of opposite angles that are congruent to one another. So in this picture, my opposite angles are the angles that are not directly next to each other. We see that angle A is congruent to angle C, and that angle B is congruent to angle D. Now, the other property that you need to be aware of regarding angles is that consecutive angles are sometimes called adjacent angles, and consecutive or adjacent angles are angles that are not opposite one another. So in this particular picture, angles A and D would be supplementary, as would any pair of angles that are not opposite in that particular picture. So angle D would be supplementary to angle C, angle B would be supplementary to angle C, angle B would be supplementary to angle A. Any pair of angles that are next to each other, not across from each other in that picture, are going to be supplements of one another. So these are the properties that you need to be aware of with respect to angles. Both pairs of opposite angles are congruent, and all angles that are not opposite angles are supplementary. All right, the last two properties of parallelograms that you need to be aware of have to do with the diagonals. The first thing that you need to be aware of is that diagonals of a parallelogram will always bisect each other. So in other words, if I'm looking at this picture and point E is the point at which my diagonals meet, I know that the two pieces of one diagonal, so the two parts of diagonal AC, are congruent to each other. So segment AE is congruent to segment EC. And I know that the two pieces of the second diagonal are also congruent. So segment DE is congruent to segment EB. So that's the first property that you need to be aware of with respect to the diagonals, is that they bisect one another. The second property that you need to be aware of with respect to the diagonals is that in any parallelogram, the diagonal divides that parallelogram into two congruent triangles. So if this is my parallelogram ABCD, I know that the triangle on top, triangle ABD, is congruent to the triangle on bottom. And when I name my triangles, like always, I need to make sure I match up my corresponding vertices. So angles A and C, because they're opposite angles in this parallelogram, are congruent to one another. Angle B is going to match up with and be congruent to angle D in the second triangle. And then D and B in the third triangle are congruent to one another. So those are all the properties of which you need to be aware of regarding parallelograms. Like always, I'm going to have you take some time, look over what we talked about on page 9, reflect upon that, and really take some time and spend some time with the material and think about and put in your own words what are the key ideas that you need to bring away with from this video. And then once you've done that, see if you can use those properties to solve the problems up at the top of page 10.